Hi, I'm Harut Markarian, and this is Mobility and Inclusion, the show where we share the powerful stories of people with disabilities and daring entrepreneurs making waves in our world. From technological innovations to best practices in business, we'll learn what it really means to live in an inclusive and universally designed environment. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Mobility and Inclusion. My guest today is Christopher Laureano. Chris is graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in music at Rhode Island College in 2015. Chris has also been certified as a peer specialist in the state of Massachusetts since 2016. He has lived experience in both dealing with anxiety and trauma and in living as an autistic person. As a result of his lived experiences, Chris came into peer support work with the desire and passion to support people receiving services in creating their own life path and to help create meaningful systemic change in both the mental health and public health systems. Chris currently works as the director of the Recovery Education and Learning Program at Bay Cove Human Services in Boston, Massachusetts, and has been in this role since 2019. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Harut, for having me.
It is our pleasure to have you. It's my pleasure to have you. Before we move on any further, let's define some terms for our audience. Like, what is anxiety? What is trauma? And everybody knows what autism is, but why don't we give some type of context to these words so we can go on with our discussion?
Sure. So for me, the way that I would define anxiety first off is it's based off of something that is either situational or something that might happen from within ourselves in the body that cause us to feel certain sensations in our body, whether it's feeling different, shakes or tremors in different areas of our body, like our chest or stomach or so on, or if it's just anxiety from something that's just kind of happened internally. For me, when I've had anxiety, I've had it through different social situations, especially as someone who is autistic, and that has caused me to, get into situations that ended up sort of derailing my progress in terms of bettering myself and evolving myself for a while. So anxiety is anything that does affect us in those ways, where we have those sensations, and it can be from any type of situation that's life related that anyone goes through, or it can just be something that just happens out of nowhere. And then trauma is something that can physically and mentally happen to us because of specific situations, or because of anything we may have gone through in our life. So it may be from any type of abuse that we may have experienced, any type of emotional or physical neglect, or other forms of neglect, and also any type of situation that has caused a lot of dysfunction. So if you're a child that has parents that have gone through a divorce, or if you've had family members that are incarcerated, or even if you've had certain mental health challenges that, because of the way you've been treated by the mental health or public health systems, that those things also cause trauma as well, along with using substances and many other different types of situations.
Mhm.
And I wanted to kind of emphasize a little bit more on the systemic piece too, because a
Please.
lot of times when people talk about anxiety and trauma, a lot of those things are those topics are seen as things that are embedded from within. And in some ways, that is true. But we also have to consider that for people receiving services, how they're often treated by the mental health and public health systems, especially when they're looked at from a fear based or deficit based lens, that they're not capable of making decisions in their own lives, or that they are seen as dangerous, or any other type of stereotypical biased statements, that when they're getting that constant messaging in the environment when receiving services, it ends up sticking with them for many years, decades, and even their whole lifetime. So that systemic disenfranchisement, if you will, is also another form of trauma. And even just identifying yourself as either, a black person, being black, queer, trans. I mentioned autistic, blind, deaf, or really anything else, and how the system treats us is also something that causes trauma. So trauma and anxiety happen in many different forms for many different reasons.
Got it. Wow, you said a lot of things, and I have a lot of questions to you. But let me go back to, so you named several cases. You said black, queer, um, autistic, and basically the way either you identify yourself or you are identified by the eyes of the public, right? Um, and so I have a bit of issue when people say I'm black and they have a perception versus people say I'm, I don't know, white and they have a perception, I'm queer and there's a perception. At the core of all of this, there's the person, the spiritual being, which is the most important thing, right? Um, so why do you think, in your experience, either the individual or the public or the system as a whole is choosing to perceive those nuances versus the true being?
Well, I think, there's many different answers for this, and it really depends on each person's experience. But um, I think a lot of that has to do with the way that we are educated about mental health, substance use, trauma, and all these other life altering experiences that I mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
A lot of times, as I've said before, whether it's the mental health or public health system, and this goes back to how people are often looked at for the past several centuries, especially those that have had mental health challenges. If you really think of those time periods, going back to as far back as the 16 to 1700s, and maybe even further back than that, anyone that was perceived to be different than normal, whether it was mental health or anything else, the answer was often institutionalization, and often people being treated in such barbaric ways that for a lot of people also included death. Um, and in some ways, there has been thankfully some changes that have happened along the way, but also another factor that is more recent is going back to the 1970s, more so the 1980s, with big pharmaceutical companies that have been involved in different sources of media, such as medication commercials that you often see for those that have different mental health diagnostic labels put on them.
Mhm.
And how Western society views that is, let's give people medications because medications are the only answer. And that often isn't true for the majority of people, if not really anyone.
Oh,
Um,
I 100% agree with that. And I'm not in your environment, but I completely disagree with applying medication to treat symptoms because as I said, we're treating symptoms. We're not going after the root cause. And I'm going to come to that. I'm sorry I cut you off, but I think
that's okay.
you brought up a very good point in terms of you know treating people with medication, right? A lot of times we're only treating the symptom and we're not even attempting to take a whack at the root cause of the individual's true problems or the true challenge. So what's your experience and how I guess what are you doing differently to change the system, because that's a systemic issue right now, right? And you talk about
Yes.
that. You talk about that in your in your opening, in your bio a little bit, how you're attempting to change the mental health system and the basically the system that surrounds the public on how to treat them. So, what are you doing in your current role in changing that?
Well, I think the very first thing that I'm doing, and it's not just myself, but
Of
also
course.
my supervisor who works with me in the real program at Bay Cove and a bunch of other peer support team members that I work with, what we're all doing first off is really continuously educating the staff that we work with about um, different aspects of you know what the mental health system is like and how it typically functions. And when we do that, we mention and emphasize greatly on the education about how the mental health system often puts pressure on providers to get people to do something, whether it's to accept a service or treatment, because they're getting that pressure from the system to get the people that they're supporting to do so, which
Mhm.
oftentimes isn't helpful. So we educate staff about how that kind of thing is more harmful than helpful to the majority of people. Um, and we also talk about many different concepts, such as the concept of self determination when it comes to a person's life journey or recovery. So, letting people make their own decisions on what their life path looks like and being able to honor their dignity of risk, meaning instead of looking at people as those that are at risk and need to be kept safe, changing that language to looking at them as people that have gone through a lot and are probably still going through a lot rather than something being wrong with them. Because a lot of times when you think of the stuff that we hear in the media, how we're educated about mental health and even substance use, it's often the blame is often put on the person as though they're the problem and there's something wrong with them. So, educating them about what looking at it from the lens of what happened to you versus what's wrong with you, quote unquote, is one of the first steps. So we talk about that in the different programs that we work with staff all the time, and we encourage collaborative dialogue, and we let them ask us questions about what we mean by those concepts and how they apply to the different way that we provide care in the system. And in the training in a training that I also do as part of the real program, we talk about this stuff a lot so that those that have lived experience with receiving services from the system are going into peer support or clinical work, depending on their choosing, with that based information in mind so that they can use that to be able to help us do effective work and to be able to change the system in many ways.
That's great. It's great that you're educating your teachers in approaching the challenge in the correct way. I love that. And let me ask you a quick question. At what age you realize that um, Chris has anxiety and trauma, is going through trauma? At what age you realize that these stuff?
Well, first off, I would say that I didn't have any diagnostic labels attached to those two things, but I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at the age of 3. So that's when some of the characteristics of me being autistic started, was when I was around the age of 2, and then the diagnosis was there at the age of 3. So this is going back to 1993 when I was diagnosed with that. As far as anxiety and trauma are concerned, um, I've had different traumatic situations throughout my life in when I was very little and in middle school. And I think, and that started around the ages of between 10 and 12. Um, there was one situation where I was bullied by a bunch of classmates that I went to school with during the winter time for being different, for not responding socially in the way that they were. And so I was
Mm.
often teased and made fun of, and I often thought about not wanting to live. Um, and then during my early 20s, so going back to 2010, um, I was in college at the time, and this is where I noticed for the very first time that my anxiety had ramped up because of different social situations I was in where I was coming to terms with my sexuality as a gay man. And at the same time, I had a crush with a guy that I went to college with. And we made up many years later, and we're now friends. But during that period, he treated me so horribly, after kind of professing like how I was feeling about him. And I'll admit, there were times that I kind of did certain things that were a little bit eccentric, but not alarming. Like I would stare at him for a little bit, and he wouldn't like that very much. And he had said something to me that was really harmful, in that I remember, it was regarding his desire that if he was a different gender, that he would have reported me for harassment. That was the first instance in a long time since middle school where I had experienced any kind of trauma. Um, and the effects of that lasted for approximately 6 to 7 years until he and I finally met up and we both owned our parts and made up.
Just to
And
clarify, was this person also gay?
yes,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Continue, please. Yeah.
And I also, at the same time when all this was happening, I was also dealing with a situation with a music education professor at the college that I went to, that really traumatized me in many different ways. Where I would ask her for advice and she would not give it. I would ask her for support; she wouldn't be there for me. She was very manipulative in the way that she talked to me. Um, and she would do often things that not only didn't make a lot of sense in terms of the way she treated myself and other classmates, but in ways that were emotionally harmful to many
Mm.
people. And so I dealt with both of those things amongst other related social situations. And during that time period in college, that's where my anxiety and trauma really ramped up. And it got to the point that I ended up having to seek therapy in 2014, to really process everything that was going on, because none of it was making any sense. Um, and so it was at the age of 20 that all of that stuff started. And at the age of 24 was when I sought therapy. And then eventually, through running a leadership organization, mainly for the purpose of getting out of the music ed environment, um, I ended up being networked into peer support, which I eventually started doing at the age of 25. And so both therapy and peer support were ways that were very healing to me in terms of helping me to process the anxiety and traumatic situations that I was going through in my life at that time.
That's great. I'm glad you overcame that challenge of yours. So you said it took that trauma lasted about 6 to 7 years. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
And at what point during did you wait till year 7 or 6 to say, okay, I need to consult with someone about this? And the reason I'm asking is for our audience, in case someone is experiencing such a stuff, when they experience such a thing, do they immediately go and seek help, or what's that sweet spot, I guess, to not completely harm you, but say that, oh, there's a problem and I need to address it? Where's that sweet spot?
So the sweet spot for me, just I think generally speaking, and this was actually more so for the fourth year out of the 6 to 7 year period, was where I was going through so much all at once that it was a miracle that academically I still did well, despite what I was going through. But deep inside, internally and emotionally, I had gotten to a point where everything just felt too much. It was too
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
And so when I was at that point, there was an inner voice inside of me that was part of the fight that I always had, that said, "This is Chris, this is not your life. Like there has to be something that is better than this." And so that listening to that inner voice, for in terms of my experience, was what worked for me in terms of seeking help. So therapy helped me to really process through having a different life outlook in terms of not only understanding analytically why something was happening to me, but also being able to embrace different life perspectives enough so that the more I was exposed to that, the more I could challenge myself head on through getting into new adventures and doing new and different things I didn't expect to do.
Mhm.
And and then also peer support was really helpful in a non-clinical way of just being able to just have a safe space to talk about these certain things that I couldn't talk to my therapist about. And both of those things together were really things that really helped me to further challenge myself. And so, because I had done those things, by the time that the 6 to 7 year period was almost at its end, um, because of what I had done through both therapy and peer support, I felt so encouraged and I felt such an inspiration of hope that anything was possible for me beyond what I was going through internally inside, that I ended up eventually being in a space where, this person in college that I had an issue with reached out to me. And even though I was nervous and I talked with my therapist about it, I was able to um, realize through that conversation with him that I had come such a long way in terms of processing what was going on and giving myself the safe space to do so on my own terms. And so then that alone gave me the courage to start making amends with this person. And then that started a chain of making amends with my past, either through other people or entities or environments. And I'm happy to say that coincidentally, as of last year, all the stuff that happened to me during my years in college, I was able to almost completely heal from that right before the pandemic started.
Mhm.
So this was definitely a multi-year journey for me, and it was so when after all the work that I had done and all the things I went through in my life and constantly challenging myself over the years to be like, no, this doesn't have to be my life. I don't have to be in misery. I can be curious. I can ask questions. I can challenge authority. I can challenge other people and myself. Um, that's really what ultimately brought me into a place of serenity and peace.
Okay. Um, I'm glad you're at that place right now, by the way. But if for one reason or the other, that person who reached out to you, let's say, to make amends, right, um,
Mhm.
didn't reach out at all, were you going to be able to overcome that hump? I mean, in your opinion, what effect does that have?
So that's a good question. At first, because I was actually asked this by my therapist a few years ago, actually, and through other people in my life. So um, I think if you had asked me that a few years ago, I probably would not have accepted that result in general. But now, because of sort of where I'm at in my life and with everything that I've achieved and that I've overcome, I was able to get to a place where I've healed through most of the anxiety and the trauma. Um, and there's still other personal things that I'm dealing with, but being able to move through those situations has led me to realize the importance of accepting any outcome
Yeah.
that happens, and that there's more than one form of acceptance and closure from my past, from all those
Mhm. Mhm.
chapters. So today I would say that I'm okay if the person didn't approach me to make amends, that I would make amends with the situation by you know doing other things that I enjoy that may not relate to the situation,
Yeah.
or even just to physically walk around the environment in which it happened and create my own peace in some way.
I'm really glad you're saying what you're saying, because I do a lot of personal development, personal growth, mindset growth, right? And a lot of things I say to people is, you know, you are a unique being, right? Whether it's you, Chris, or anyone else, me, uh, those who are listening the show, every single one of us is unique, and
Mhm.
we shouldn't get hung on our past. Our past is our past. We learn from them, we move forward, right? And we should definitely not bet our happiness or our future on people. You always bet on yourself, and you always give attention to the thoughts that are in your mind, because that is ultimately driving results through your body. So if you allow me to give you a friendly advice, and I'm not a therapist, but I've talked to enough people to be able to, share a few things. Um, and I always tell people there are three things that matter in your being: your mind, your body, and your spirit. All of which have nothing to do with another person. This is purely yours, right? Yes, we do have sensory factors that attract input from the outside world, but you have your higher faculties like your imagination, your will, your perception, your intuition, that makes you a higher being, right? So if you use this higher faculties of your mind effectively, you can come out of any situation, any trauma, any anxiety. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying the situations that you've gone through. But, and what I'm saying is definitely not easy to do. It requires practice, it requires constant effort, right? It's like everything else. It's not easy, but there is a way and there is a solution. And you should definitely not get hung on the past. The past is the past. And I always say there's no good, there's no bad, no bad. The situation is the situation. Whether it's good or bad, it's your perception, it's your experience, right? So
Mhm.
make your own experience moving forward. Now you know what you want, what you don't want, and keep going up and keep going, moving forward. And that's why I usually say, and I hope I impacted you in a little bit in what I said.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And and one thing I wanted to kind of emphasize is kind of partially what you said earlier too, as far as different things working for different people.
Mhm.
Um, because we talk at Bay Cove, we talk a lot about self-determination and dignity of risk and so on. My experience was different in such that I always had that inner fight inside of me that was thankfully guiding my intuition to make changes in my life. But when we're supporting people, whether we're working as a peer specialist or as a clinical provider, we often encounter people that, because of the systemic disenfranchisement that they've experienced throughout a lot of their lives, that a lot of them have not even gone into that discovery period yet. And so it's important that we form connections with these people and form mutual relationships with them in ways where it that are beyond discussions of diagnosis and treatment, but just being able to share pieces of our stories with them, and in terms of letting them share those with us, and then really just having a conversation, getting to know them from scratch, and being able to have conversations about what could be possible in each other's lives, so that we're both mutually learning from each other.
Mhm.
And having those types of conversations is where the discovery often happens.
Absolutely.
But it takes a while because of the length of time that they've received services and a lot of the lived experiences that they went through as a result. So it's important to not pressure them to evolve at a specific time, that it's really important to kind of let them create that path on their own terms and to meet them where they're at.
Absolutely. That's very well said. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I want to move back to Bay Cove a little bit.
Sure.
And, they focuses on individualized services, right? And so I want to hone in on the individualized services, because there's various types of individuals with various types of challenges, right? And I'm assuming this is why it specifically says the word individualized services, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So you help people who are facing challenges associated with developmental disabilities, mental illness, homelessness, um, aging-related needs, drug use, and alcohol use, right? So in your experience, what is the percentage? So these 5, 6 categories that I mentioned, for example, are they right now in the United States or in, let's say, Boston? Um, are they equally spread out? Meaning we have like 20% of of people in mental illness, 20% homelessness, 20% aging related needs, and 20% drug and alcohol. Is that how it is, or it varies?
I would say that it varies and it's often a mix. In terms of specifically, with the REAL program in and of itself, which by the way, the REAL program is an acronym for the Recovery Education and Learning Program.
Mhm.
Um, so I deal with people that have all different types of lived experiences, regardless of whether it's a previous thing or if it's something that is current at the time. Um, and keep in mind that this program, because we have the peer support and direct care training in our internships, it's an entry level program because of the situations that a lot of people that we support often experience. So it's more of a mix that for some, they may have experiences with mental health and substance use. Sometimes it's one or the other. Sometimes it's all of them in combination with trauma or other life altering experiences that are otherwise not named. So I would say overall, in terms of the REAL program in and of itself, it's a mix. So it's hard to kind of give a percentage.
Got it.
But then of but then of course, Bay Cove as an entire agency has many different type of service programs for those that have different types of experiences, and those are more segregate, if you will, in some ways.
Awesome. Okay. Perfect. That's well said. I wanted to clarify that a little bit, and really emphasize what Bakov is doing and the great work that they're doing, because individualized service is really important. Especially in the community of people with disabilities, you can't do a boilerplate solution, right? This fits for everybody. It doesn't work that way. I mean, if it was going to be that way, of course things would have been easier, right? But it's not the case. You know it. It's not the case. I know it's not the case. Um, Now, just for as a last word, how are you or Bay Cove in general attempting to revolutionize the system?
Hmm. Well, I know I talked a little bit about you know, collaborating with colleagues about different concepts like self-determination, identity of risk. So that's one way. Also, through one specific longer term mental health service program, we have peer specialists that do something called the peer moment, which we take about 15 to 20 minutes of each and every team meeting to have discussions about these topics, as well as about certain things that are going on in the group homes that should not be happening, whether it's under the vein of human rights violations or practices that kind of walk the line, and we have collaborative discussions about ways to address those things. Um, and we talk about a bunch of other topics. We let colleagues ask us questions, and it gives us a chance to really constantly learn from each other every week. Um, and the peer support and direct care training, which is a 4-week training that the REAL program does, is another way that really helps to create that systemic change, where we talk about what goes into working as a peer specialist as well as what goes into working as a clinical provider. And we specifically have the prerequisite of having people with those lived experiences receiving services taking
Mhm.
those trainings rather than others that don't have that experience,
Absolutely.
because we believe that they are the very people that knows what it's like to go through the systemic problems that they've been through during their lifetimes of receiving services. And so the idea is to really have a training that fosters these discussions and to really be open about it so that it gives them an inspiration of hope to be able to carry what they learn from that training into their work in human services, regardless of which path they choose to do. And I'm very thankful that I have an entire peer support team and supervisor that's in support of it. Our executive leadership and grants manager and marketing communications person are all wonderful in helping us to create this type of change. And we specifically talked about a specific framework called intentional peer support, which is yet another way of making the change that is in terms of the framework of how we provide care to people, which really emphasizes heavily connection and mutuality in the relationship building with people that receive services, because it is a way that is more humane, and that really produces more results in terms of the engagement with the particular care or service. And we've already seen some strides with that over the past few years. So those are just a few of some of the many ways that we've been able to create the change, and we're always evolving in our ways of doing so over time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Evolution is key. I think it is very important to always evaluate how we're doing things, because at any point in time we can, find something that we can do better in our services, right? So I commend you on everything that you're doing. Bakov is doing a great job. Now, Bakov are they servicing Boston only, Massachusetts, or?
It's within the entire greater Boston area. So there are various cities that surround Boston, whether they're it's I think geographically it's kind of complicated because there's Boston and then there's towns that are all part of Boston themselves. So it's like city names within a city.
Okay.
And then there are also different cities that are outside of that area that are surrounding the entire greater Boston geographic space, if you will. So Bay Cove has that entire area as their catchment area where they provide services. So it's just there.
Perfect. No, that's great. Hey, in closing, I want to say thank you for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you did too. And my last piece of advice before we say goodbye is always pay attention to the thoughts that are sitting in your mind, because that is what's going to be transferred into behavior. Because the thoughts go through emotions, and then emotions ultimately go in physical form, and that's your behavior. So pay attention to what you're thinking about. Pay attention to the thought energy that is in your mind, and make sure that you're always staying positive and you're always growing. All right.
And might I just add one little thing also?
Please do.
I think at the same time, it's there are certain situations for many people where they are in circumstances where, because of the lived experiences that they've had, that they're not always in the space of thinking positive. And I think
Absolutely.
The reason for that, I think, is that connection and mutuality piece often in the clinical system is missing. So being able to have the safe space to talk about different things that they're going through, whether it's trauma, anxiety, even suicide, and hearing voices and other things, without being, fearing that someone is going to immediately assume the worst of what they're going through, where they might have to be hospitalized or accept services that aren't helpful. So as important as it is to be in a positive mindset, it's equally important when we're supporting people to let them come to that in their own terms, and to be able to really have deeper conversations with people and get to really know who they are and how they come to know what they know. And just through natural and organic conversation, without always giving directives or advice, can be a really powerful way in terms of discovering for both you and them what can be possible for both of you in your lives. So that's also equally important.
I 100% agree with you. That's why I also talk about self-image. And the first thing I I tell the person in front of me to do is to describe me their self-image, because that is going to tell me what they think about their self and their confidence level, right? So it goes back to what you're saying, having that safe space, going through things on their own terms without being given directives. It's equally important, and I agree with you. All right, thank you, Chris, for this valuable time. I hope the audience enjoyed it. I will be back with you soon with a different guest. Thank you and take care.